invite, ladies, welcome, I beg your pardon, the Deputy CEO of the TMA, Madam Allen Asiimwe, as she walks us through I Like My Coffee Black, Trade Today and Trade Tomorrow, the realities. Please, a round of applause.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Good afternoon to you all. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. So I'll call my panel up very quickly. As you can see, it's a coffee table. We're going to do a lot of gossiping and chatting, but also hopefully come up with some solutions. So in no particular order, let me have Antoine Sebera from the Rwanda Information Society Authority. I'll have Moses Kemibaro, the founder and CEO of Dotsavvy, one of the leading voices on tech in the region. I'll have Bernice Omiunu, sorry, accents, founder Women in Blockchain and working a lot on inclusion and innovation for women. And finally, last but not least, we'll have Gabriel Negatu, TMA board member and also a member of the Atlantic Council. Welcome, Gabriel. I've been taken off my jacket. That's how exciting it is. So, yeah, I like my coffee black. What we aim to do with this session is really have a frank discussion of trade today, trade tomorrow, what is not being spoken in the room, and what we should be talking about. And I want to start by asking my panel, before I set the scene, this is a bit of gossip about this morning's session. What is your take? What did you take from it? What do you think was said? What do you think wasn't said? What would you have wanted to be said by the leaders and policymakers on digital and on trade in Africa? Moses, you first.
Thank you very much. I think for me, the reality is that as things currently stand, it's incredibly difficult to trade amongst ourselves, even more so than what we see when we trade with international partners in other countries like Europe and so forth. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think the main thing I would say is that we need to figure out how to leverage digital trade in a manner that's more aggressive and possibly with better regulations and sort of lower the barriers and the friction that would open up digital trade in a much more substantial manner, but also in a way that is easy and sort of at a transactional level cost effective.
Yeah, totally. And we had the Secretary General say we can do better. We certainly can do better for women. We certainly can do better for young people. We certainly can do better for Africa, because with all the money that's being poured into trade, we are seeing the numbers not shifting. And Bernice, your take from this morning.
Okay, so I would say it was really enlightening, and a lot was being shared today that really I did not anticipate in hearing. But what I really wanted was, like you rightly mentioned, creating policies, forums where women's voices are being heard, especially in the digital space, and even creating innovation, because women getting to be a part of this digital economy is more than just giving a way we could actually give them a voice is by making them delegates or contributors in this space as well. So I would say it was really, really enlightening and a wealth of knowledge that was gathered here today in early hours of today's session. Yeah.
Thank you. And Gabriel, what was your take? I know you're one of our foremost policy leaders. And you've done a lot of work. You've been at the other side.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. I took some comfort in the discussion around what it's going to take to implement CFTA, and it was good. Secretary General was here, Afrexim, and the Prime Minister. So you had people from all walks, but a different perspective, but there seems to be a convergence on what it's going to take to do that. So at least we are analyzing the problem. We may not get to the solution yet, but at least we are understanding the issues.
No, I like that, and I think the Vice President from Afrexim said it well. He said we are dealing with a big problem. We can't do it alone. I always have an analogy of an elephant. Africa has the most amazing elephants, and elephants are huge. You can't bite an elephant and eat it in one go. Can you? Africans, can you? You have to take it. If you had a riddle, how do you eat an elephant? Piece by? And you have to be together. It takes a whole clan to eat that one elephant. So it takes all of us. And I liked that conversation around what we can do to actually drive Africa's trade. It's not going to be one organization. It's not going to be one body, not trademark, but it's going to take all of us. And I think what I liked this morning, and I know you missed that part, so I'll skip you, but what I liked was that there was that commitment. And for those of us who have been in this trade sector for long, we know that if you don't have the political commitment and the political will to really drive change, it will take a long time. Organizations like ours at TradeMark, we do technical solutions. We do lots of good stuff, digital stuff, infrastructure, working with women. But if you don't have the political will and the political momentum, it takes a challenge. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon, this session of I Like My Coffee Black is really about taking a deep, in-depth look at what we can do for trade. I have the privilege of working across 20 countries in Africa, and I do get to travel. And much as I see a lot of optimism, there's also a lot of frustrations. One of the biggest questions I'm being asked again and again is, but why aren't the trade volumes growing? Why isn't trade growing as we thought it would grow? And the values, especially given we have the AFCTA, and we have a lot of other policies. So that frustration is growing, and I think as it ripens, it will hopefully help us to churn the much-needed catalyst we need to drive trade across Africa. And for us at TradeMark, we see digital as a critical tool for that. We have been working on digital solutions for the last decade, and we have seen what digitization, and I'll categorize digital trade into three. We look at digitization, we look at automation, and we also look at e-commerce. On the first two, digitization and automation, we've seen a lot of shifts. We've actually seen trade costs come tumbling down in East Africa. We've seen the time it takes to trade come down by so many days and sometimes months. We've also seen trade volumes grow slightly, but mostly for imports, and not so much for exports. We also know that digital trade, at least according to the World Trade Organization, could unlock 2.5% growth per year for trade. Can you imagine? It's mind-boggling. It could unlock trade by 2.5%. So what is it that we're waiting for? And so I'll start with you, Gabriel, and please feel free to hit each other and ask questions, because the people I have at the table are known for speaking frankly. Gabriel, you've been at the forefront of infrastructural and trade reforms in Africa, in East Africa, Eastern Africa, mostly in the infrastructure sector. This morning we had much, as we do the trade infrastructure, we also have to grow the soft infrastructure. The intersection of trade infrastructure, digital infrastructure to power the digital revolution is huge. We are talking about digital energy to power those servers. We are talking about, it's huge. Where do you see this happening, and how do you see this happening?
Let me get the question again. Sorry.
Yeah. The intersection between the we have to invest heavily in digital infrastructure. It's not just going to happen overnight. We have had all these small initiatives, and yet, as the SG said, by 2035, we are going to need, I don't know how many servers, how many hubs, just to power digital trade. So where do you see that? How do you see that happening, and especially financing all these huge investments that are going to be needed?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you, Allen. This is an interesting time to be discussing where this intersection is going to be, because, if you step back about 2 decades or a decade or two ago, the primary focus on infrastructure was largely around hard infrastructure, roads, ports, railways, and transmission lines, and so on. And what has happened in the last decade or two is the playbook has changed, both in terms of content and financing. So this new generation of infrastructure we're talking about now to catalyze and enable trade is largely the new generation of infrastructure. And there you're going to need a big dose of infrastructure that either has been weak or is non-existent. So you've got the core elements of the digital economy that is going to require everything from, internet servers to mobile phone, what do you call it, towers and network coverage, cloud services, these kind of innovative infrastructure. But not only the building of it, but the access, affordability, the reliability, all this is going to be new, and different. Equally, in equal measures, the how you finance it is also changing. In the past, we largely focused, as I say, on hard infrastructure and financed it in the main through public sector financing, either through domestic revenue or borrowing and what have you. But that has now changed. The fiscal space for our countries has tightened. The debt sustainability issues has become serious. Therefore, governments or the public sector can no longer finance it. So the new playbook is that you need the public sector to do some stuff through a PPP framework that allows the government some role, that allows the private sector some role, and that allows development partners a role both in financing the infrastructure, but knowledge generation, knowledge distribution, capacity building, and so on. So it is a new way of thinking about the infrastructure and a new way of financing it. That's the way I see it.
Thank you, Gabriel. Basically, we need a Zuckerberg or a Bezos in the room. And I never shy to ask, anyone has any connections to them? We are only 6 degrees separated, so never be shy. And I know there are some South Africans in the room, in terms of, we need to get connected to Musk as well. Because we need to power the technologies. The vehicles that are going to drive this green trade have to be powered by green technologies. It's not cheap. And we need this new financing. And today we're challenged to look for those white spaces by Afreximbank. We're also challenged to do it greenfield because we have nothing. We basically have a new playing board. But I want to turn to you, Innocent, because we've seen one sector leapfrog, the financial sector. We've seen M-Pesa, and I know we have sung this song so much. M-Pesa just revolutionized the way things are done in the financial sector. I moved to Kenya a few years ago. I hadn't put M-Pesa on my phone, I couldn't survive. Even the taxi driver, nothing, I couldn't do anything. And now I'm one of the best users of M-Pesa. So, Innocent, this whole conversation around the role of government in digital trade and data privacy. And again, this morning we had the question around how much can you control this flow of data, Because if you try to control for national security or personal data, you're missing the point. The bigger picture is the commercial data we need to be looking at. Tell us your experience and where you're seeing that sweet spot.
Thank you very much. I think there is a balance that we have to strike. There's a lot of innovation that we can unlock with the data. You mentioned that over the last decade or two, we've been making a lot of investment in digital transformation, different systems that were built. So overall, people, when we started this conversation about data protection and privacy, people got a little bit scared. And it was because we had a vacuum at that time. We had the GDPR on the European continent, and a few countries started the conversation. So it was like we stopped by default. Through the legislation, we published the data protection and privacy law. People, instead of opening more, they started even to restrict and say, now, what am I risking if I disclose any information? So we had to think beyond that. One of the way is not only focus on the policy, but try to see early use cases and proof of value that you can unlock. So we started by doing experimentation. You show the value of the data in different government sectors, raise interest in the public, raise interest of people who are actually custodians of those data. And then we moved in parallel with the policy in place. You have a data protection in place. You start training the people. And now they start seeing the potential that we can have, and they're getting encouraged to share more data. So it's that balance that we need to strike on the legislation, on the use cases, together with the infrastructure that has to be put in place. As you say, we have to jump on many discussions. On the infrastructure, just to show you a gap in terms of data center, what we have in the US, they have about 2,000 data center. Africa is nowhere close to where we are, so there's still a big infrastructure gap that we need to address, and the infrastructure are built a little bit going to the sea. Similar to what was in the colonial times, the railways, the roads, so we are going to the sea to reach the submarine cables. So we have to think also how we interconnect different countries. We are not there. If I send an email to someone who is in Southern Sudan, it will fly away maybe through Europe or Asia before coming back. So this is also a point that we need to address. Thank you. And by the way, I'm Antoine, not innocent.
Oh, sorry, sorry. I'm using an old playbook. Sorry, thank you, Antoine. And thank you so much. I mean, you've raised something very key, that balancing that legislation and the freedom. But then there's the whole thing about the data, which you talked about, the use cases and the data value. This new gold, we have all had it in so many forums. Data is the new gold. Why isn't there a gold rush? Why aren't we rushing? We know it can help us leapfrog. We know it can get us across, to the promised land. Why isn't there a gold rush? And I'll turn to you, Moses. You've been quite vocal. You've been quite outspoken on these issues. There's this whole thing that came out this morning, the implementation gap. There's the trust deficit, but there's also the implementation gap between policy and practice. What is wrong? What is missing? Why aren't we actually driving data, digital innovation and technology and supporting as it should be to get us to that promised land?
I think there are a number of factors. As somebody who's been a practitioner in this space for over 20 years, I think for the longest time it's been financing. If you look at just now the AI era that we're now living in, the amount of billions of dollars being deployed by companies like Meta, companies like XAI, Elon Musk, and so forth. I mean, to the order of, I think now they're going to be putting down, I think, hundreds of millions building out this new AI infrastructure. And for me, probably that's the biggest opportunity, but also the biggest risk for Africa, because the reality is that we don't seemingly have those resources to play at that level. Number two, a lot of the systems and platforms that are being deployed on these systems are not designed or do not take into consideration the African perspective, right? So we have this risk where even if we do have data, the platforms have not been tuned or modified to work for us. Yeah. But though we're seeing early signs that there is something happening, I think if I look at the Kenyan scenario, we have about 5 or 6 significant data centers on the ground. We're handling what they call hyperscalers, top companies like Netflix and Microsoft and Google's and all are coming into the market. We know Microsoft is going to be deploying with GE 42 $1 billion data center in Naivasha, which is going to be a green data center. So as much as we are behind, we are seeing this proliferation across the continent, by the way, where data centers and cloud services and all are starting to catch up. The other thing I think that we have working for us is our talent. We have an incredible talent pool of young Africans, many of whom are self-taught online, learning how to code, learning how to do data science and other things. And we're also seeing a proliferation of schools and academies that are actually giving them specific skill sets in these areas. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, the story is going to change a lot in terms of the talent piece, the infrastructure piece, but ultimately we also still need direct investment to build out this infrastructure, what we call the cloud, because ultimately it's predicated on data centers.
Totally. I mean, I didn't understand half of what you said. It was very digital, but it made a lot of sense because we must get there. One of the things I know for Africa to grow, the know-how and the tech must grow and the talent. And we're blessed and privileged to have Bernice, one of our homegrown talent, who has dived right in. Blockchain technology, you're trying out this, you're trying to create, you're trying to innovate, you're saying we need to get women engaged. Tell us about your experience and the potential digital has. And then I'll come back on some of the issues you've raised on the sea cables run, we're still looking outward and not inward. You've also talked about the copycat, and I know ECDPM, I know they're in the room. Bryce. They've done a study recently on cross-border data transfers, and one of the biggest challenges is that we are copycatting and we are not looking at African context. So I'll take you up on those two issues. But first, Bernice, your experience and where you see the opportunities.
Okay, thank you very much. So like was rightly mentioned, I currently lead Women in Blockchain Africa, which is a decentralized technology promoter where we empower young girls, women to take the forefront in digital decentralized technologies. Beyond, for us, is beyond just building or educating these women, is making them empowered enough to build decentralized technologies on their own. And in summary, things that would solve the lingering problem that we experience in this continent. And one way we do that, having been aware that decentralized technology and blockchain is still in its early stages, we try as much as we can to first create the awareness, because we realized that when we go to rural areas and even local communities within Africa, we realize that people, not only women, they still feel that decentralized technology is either a crypto scam or it's basically just cryptocurrencies. But then we try to enlighten them that it's beyond just the decentralized financial bit of it. Decentralized technologies cuts across DAOs, which is decentralized autonomous organizations, and they can also build as little as agricultural, in the agricultural sector, they can also build solutions, decentralized solutions in that bit. And permit me to give a brief illustration by me saying decentralized marketplace and even decentralized farm or agricultural in the agricultural sector. So there are some innovations such as the agri-tech ledger, where women put together all of these innovations. They create a decentralized marketplace where people, women, are not just women, people involved in trade, they put up their products on the decentralized marketplace, and people from across the globe have access to this platform, and they make exchanges, they purchase, they either sell, they buy, no intermediaries in between. So it's beyond just them having access to this market, it's getting them more yield and getting sustainable solutions or even monetary benefit at a high cost. And so in just to top into that, like I'll just try to hit the nail on the head by saying, for us, creating the awareness is one, and also making them feel comfortable and believe the fact that they can build innovations in this ecosystem and beyond just the decentralized finance or cryptocurrencies bit.
Yeah, thanks, Bernice. And we at TradeMark have worked quite a lot to build trust of cross-border traders and women with digital solutions. We have seen firsthand the power they have to really lift these communities, both out of poverty, but also to include them. One of the platforms we've done is iSoko, iMarket. Soko is market in Swahili. And we started it last year, we launched last year, and we have around 80,000 traders. It's like an Alibaba of sorts. We are yet to put the payment platforms on. But I also know with IOTA, we are doing quite a lot on the TLIP. You saw it today. I think the biggest challenge I'm facing, and this is not just to you, it's to all of us, the scale. How do we scale these good, innovative initiatives that at country level, they are localized? How do we scale them across a continent of, within the next decade, 1.2 billion people? What is it that we're going to do to leapfrog and scale these amazing initiatives? And I would take you first, but please feel free to come in on the scalability.
Okay, so one way that these innovations will scale up is firstly the government having to embrace these technologies. In Nigeria, for example, they currently put a ban on the decentralized financial part of it, making use of Binance and whatnot. And I'm still going to echo the fact that it's the lack of awareness and understanding of the potential of this technology. So when the government, they realize that they realize the full potential of this technology, I feel, and they are communicated properly to what it holds in the near future, they would embrace it, and bringing about policies that is all embracing, and still echoing the fact that it's beyond the government to private sectors, NGOs, they need to collaborate together, and they need to partner together to even making this technology become accepted globally. And the very moment where the government body, they embrace and accept this, scaling will not be so much of a hassle. the people building these innovations, they would be fully confident to say, I think since the government has accepted this, I don't think there is anything that would withhold me from building or even expanding what I have already kickstarted, especially from the local level. Yeah.
Anyone else wants to go? I know you've done a lot of scaling. Anyone wants to take this?
Well, I mean, part of the challenge in scaling, of course, is finance. These projects, these schemes work best at size, but when you try to scale, then this issue of access to finance, capacity, and all the usual thing. But now with digitalization, it's a new frontier, and the lower you go to the smaller entities, the less IT enabled they are. So you're really challenged to bring them up to par and get them to use the process. But financing is clearly, and then policy regimes, the policy environment within the country, as the sister mentioned, governments don't embrace new technology quickly. It does take a lot of time, so all of those will compound the effect on it.
I'm going to come in on the financing, but I know you wanted to say something on the scalability.
Yeah. I think one of the caveats is interoperability, right? So if I'm going to trade with somebody in Nigeria and vice versa, and maybe speaking to your point earlier, I think there's this question around, for instance, digital wallets, the store of value. You find that there are all these different providers and platforms with different systems that don't necessarily talk to each other. I think another thing that becomes critical in scaling becomes basically the element of awareness. Do the key stakeholders even know the platform exists? Are they aware of how to use it? And also sometimes maybe the issue of digital literacy, is it an easy system for them to use and actually transact with businesses across the continent? And of course, going back to the finance question, if you are going to build something of the scale of, the Amazons or, the various platforms for places like China, I think a lot of marketing is required to just create significant awareness of its existence. And yeah, those are some of the things that come to mind.
You're all saying these things. Who should be doing it? And I'll get to the government side.
No, thank you. I think there's an interesting conversation across the world. We're increasingly talking about digital public infrastructure. And there are three components: it's digital ID, digital payments, and exchange of data. This speaks to a component about trust. How do we build trust on the digital platform to sell digital and non-digital goods? And you gave a good example of what has been happening in China. I personally visited a village that got transformed totally because they're selling just nuts, but they're able to sell across the entire channel. So a small village suddenly got access to billions of customers because of digital infrastructure that is in place. So digital ID is essential. Every country should have a digital ID that is functioning, that you can identify correctly a person, you can identify a company correctly. And then you have data sharing in place nationally, and then gradually through the different forums that we are having to enable cross-border data flows, and also digital payment platforms that are accepted locally and also between the country. So these will be building blocks that can secure that I can buy anything from a village in Togo, from any company in southern part of Africa, and be able, be really truthful in the way that they are going to deliver in terms of fulfillment, the logistics in place, and they are going to deliver within the agreed timeline. So that can form a way to enable this further scaling up.
Yeah, you touch a very pertinent point on trust. And I think both in digitization, in e-commerce, trust is central. In Europe and in the US, you've seen Amazon and the rest grow so fast. It's all built on trust. You'll order, it will be delivered. You don't like it, you can return it. The company knows they can get the money. We simply need to build these trust systems. It's a commodity that we need to, can I even call it a commodity? How do we build trust for us to really galvanize trade across Africa? How do we put in place that basic infrastructure? You've talked about the ID, the digital ID, putting our data out there. And yet we can't grow without having that connectivity, that openness and knowing what's there. Can we talk a bit about trust? How can we grow this commodity? What do we do? What do governments do? I know I've struggled a lot as we do the solutions with governments. Just sharing their data is a challenge, let alone our personal data and all. Who wants to take it? Trust. You see.
I could talk about it too.
Talk about trust. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I think that's what blockchain helps mitigate. It's transparency and immutability. So just picture it like a digital notebook, and I would like to use the example of an African producer in this case. Let's say everyone involved in the creation of a product has access to a digital notebook where they write in every step that it takes in the supply chain, but all of these people involved in the creation of this product, they cannot erase, neither can they tamper with the digital notebook. And in this case, the digital notebook is what we call blockchain, where everyone from the farmer logs in the data in which the particular date in which the cocoa, for example, was planted, up till the processor who converts this cocoa into chocolate, writes it down, includes all the processes it takes and whatnot. Then the exporter, the time in which the the chocolate in this case, was sent to the buyer was also imputed in the digital notebook or in the blockchain. So from the day, the location, the hour, the minute, the time, and everything it took the cocoa to be processed from cocoa to chocolate, it's now visible and transparent, so from the producer up till the buyer. So I think this is what blockchain actually offers in terms of trust. So you can know as the buyer, where is this cocoa product, where is this chocolate coming from, how did this chocolate get formed, what processes did it take to become processed. And that is why I keep amplifying the fact that it gives the buyer that sense of trust to that particular product, because he has already known all the processes and stage in the supply chain that particular product has undergone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a key one. And as Africa struggles to get into the global supply chain, as you heard, we're only 2% of global exports. We are struggling, and with the regulations that are coming in place globally, especially on green, on supply chain, sanctity, we are finding that we are going to lose out on more market. I'll give an example of the cocoa sector that you've talked about. Chocolate producers have to look at the entire chain and trust that this cocoa was grown, the labor rights are taken care of, the quality and standards are taken care of, so traceability. And without blockchain, I don't think we'll have a chance. And I think, I hope all of you can listen in on our session on TILIP, because that's what we are trying to do for the continent. As we trade with our partners externally and internally, until we can trust that this has been certified, this Arabica is what it is, and I can trace it all the way, we are not going to stand a chance being competitive. So that's why trust has to come into the conversation. But let me take it back into financing, and I would like to hear from each of you. On the private sector, we've seen the likes of Flutterwave come and really be challenged. We've seen, Gabriel raised the discussion around financing for these innovations and reforms, but also sustaining. Can we take any money that's out there? We have seen some of the reforms that are coming are actually going to make trade more expensive, because we are seeing a huge premium attached to these inventions. Let me give an example. If you're going to invest in scanners at each border, you're finding that those investors are going to charge, say, $100 for your cargo to pass through. And on both sides of the border, that's already $200. And that's not the only cost the transporter is paying. So should we take any money that's out there? What kind of financing should we be looking at? And I know we'll have sessions with Trade Catalyst Africa. Where is the good, clean money? How can we sustain those reforms and innovations like Flutterwave? Many of them have really hit a roadblock. Where is the money? Show me the money. Gabriel, I'll start with you and then take it round. And I know you're doing a lot of reforms on the government side.
Well, financing these new innovations, of course, is going to take some innovative approaches. As I said earlier, the traditional publicly financed initiatives don't apply today. So it's going to take a healthy...
But where is this money? The new approaches and the new money, where?
Well, you've got money in the public sector, so some domestic resources. Governments increasingly are now reluctant to borrow to finance these initiatives, and partly because of the debt overhang. So mostly domestic resources, which is not going to be much. Then you've got the private sector. Now, many of these initiatives have a very good return on investment. ROI on any one of these initiatives is such that private equity funds, venture funds, what have you, are all eager to come in. But there are things that government needs to put in place. Policy regimes, regulatory frameworks, enabling environment, those policy and regulations that government needs to put in place. But if that happens, I'm certain there is enough clean, good money chasing after good products. This project, what is it, Tupperware, was it in Nigeria, the company that you mentioned? Flutterware, yeah. That, I think, Alan, is an outlier. It is not your standard approach. There are several others who are doing well. That has, from what I understand, other issues that are not directly related to the performance of the company, but there are enough resources out there, private resources. You've got a mix of public money, private sector money through a PPP framework, and the government has a very important role to play here in terms of making it happen. You talked about trust. There's a big deficit on trust around PPPs. You can count with one hand the number of successful PPPs in this continent, and part of it is financial, but part of it is trust, corruption, and all these. So once you clear the deck of those issues, then I think there is enough money, and then development partners also have a role to play, both in terms of supporting countries with building local capacity, indigenous capacity, in terms of doing research and knowledge transfer that's required to make these things happen. So it's going to take all three partners coming together to make it happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, across the region, I see governments really getting sucked into concessions and, unsavory kind of financing that is unfortunately going to increase the cost of trade. And as we heard again, increasing the cost of trade deters trade. So, Antoine.
Thank you. From a government perspective, I think there's a role regional bodies can play in harmonizing the regulatory environment and the policy environment. So as we become more attractive for investment, if you're talking about huge investments that we need now in digital infrastructure, you mentioned about billions. AI is going to ask for a lot of investment that no single country will be able to put forward as a government or even attracting it as a single country. So we need to look at how we enable cross-border data sharing so that we attract investors, the hyperscaler, not looking at a single country. But if you have the environment for cross-border data sharing, we can have mutual recognition of single digital ID, harmonization of our security policies, then they can see a much bigger market, probably at regional level and going forward at continental level, which the AFCTA can actually enable to attract more investment. So money might be there. We've seen some inflows also in the startup ecosystem, Nigeria, I think South Africa, Kenya, being at the forefront. There are some people who have money, but they'll say, what is the regulatory environment? How can I grow my business to actually have 1 billion of customers instead of only 13 million? Thank you.
So have the environment in place, predictability, certainty, trust, and then money will flow in. So we really still have a lot to do in terms of that, building the ecosystem.
Absolutely.
Okay. Moses?
So personally, I'm a bit of an old school entrepreneur, meaning that I started my company at the time there was no financing. So you had to sell a product to do the payroll. When I meet our young innovators today, all I hear them talking about is raising around. It becomes their lives. Last week I interviewed the CEO of a company called Mawingu on my podcast, and they raised, I think, a total of about $20 million. And he said that I spend 40% of my daily time is focusing on raising a round, raising rounds. And for me, it's kind of ridiculous, but that is the conundrum, isn't it? That you can't grow without the financing. You have to put in as much time as you need to raise the rounds. But here's the irony. If you look at a market like Kenya, and I asked you, where does most of the money go? Which asset class soaks up most of the money in the economy? It's normally in plots of land. Land that's often sitting barren, undeveloped, and there's billions, possibly of dollars worth of land in the country that is owned, that is not mobilized or producing any value. So I think inherently, a lot of that value actually exists in our economies, but it's possibly sitting in a different asset class. And we need to start thinking about what people perceive and appreciate and know about the opportunities that are presented by things like digital trade, and more importantly, technology-based platforms that potentially have a much higher return on investment going forward, such as this AI era that we're going into right now.
Yeah. Thank you. I've seen people trying to raise those rounds, time and the angel investors coming and all. But Bernice, over to you. And then I'm going to open it up for a few minutes to hear from you, our living room audience, and to just see what solutions are out there. I was recently in a panel where we were told Africa is about NATO. We are a NATO session. And I know, Joy, you were there. We were told it's about no action, talk only. And I said, no, we are not NATO. We are actually all about action because I've seen it firsthand. So I want to hear from the audience after Bernice comes in.
Okay, I think he just made the point I was going to make, especially with regards to AI and blockchain too, and in terms of building finance. But then, I'll just leave it as it is now. They really hit the nail on the head on that piece. Yeah.
I mean, there is no way out. So I was recently in Dubai. If we are not talking about big data, we are not talking about AI and the role it could play in helping us unlock trade. Just think of the volumes, the metric tons that are coming into the region and what we are looking at exporting. We can't do it without deploying AI, just looking at the volume. So I'll open it up. We need to hear from you, our audience. I know there are a lot of experts in the room. I don't want to pick on any, but Bruce, I know you've done the cross-border data and you have some issues there that you'd want governments to listen to. Anyone? Anyone who wants to have a stake? Are you all sleeping? Please take some coffee, and we have some amazing coffee powered by women, If there is none, can I just close it with a panel in the next round? Okay, if any questions come up, I'll get back from you. As we wrap, the number of issues we haven't looked at, especially around data governance and the kind of institutions we need at the continent to be able to drive this new reform around digital. With M-Pesa, it was like a horse running before the cart. With the digital trade, we have an opportunity to actually put the frameworks in place, to put the governance structures in place, to put the institutional frameworks in place. And I don't know if any of you has any thoughts around it or what it is we could do, or any thoughts around what it is we need to do to really catalyze digital trade for the continent. I'll start with you, Bernice.
Okay. So I would say in order for us to continue with it, I will still have to echo the fact that we need more advocacy. We need more education about the potential of decentralized technology, especially how much of it can impact the digital, the trade sector. And by, like I mentioned, education and awareness, we cannot deny the fact that that is very key and necessary in making sure that people, Africans especially, adopt this technology. So having educated, we still need collaboration from, like I mentioned, the private sector, NGOs, and the government bodies, because there are so many unlocked and untapped opportunities in adopting this technology, honestly. And the more we get to create the awareness, the more we get to see collaboration, the more we get to implement policies or even implement this policy. I just recalled from the previous panel session that we have a lot of policies already on ground. What is missing out is people who should take the forefront in implementing these policies. So The more we do that, I know for sure that the digital trade, especially in Africa as a continent, will see an exponential increase and improvement. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Moses?
For some reason, I'm reminded of a program I attended many years ago. And there was a case study regarding the time that eBay tried to enter the Chinese market. And what happened is when eBay went into China, they simply changed the language of the website from English to Chinese, but they did not take into consideration the local nuances, such as the ability to negotiate and haggle for the price of a product before you buy it. Meanwhile, there's a company called Taobao, similar to eBay, that completely killed them in the market to the point that eBay left China. What's my point, right? The market leads the uptake. The local context is defined around how people do things. And increasingly, I find that after doing a lot of this for many years, that we need to start finding our own unique formula, which is not to try and mimic what maybe Amazon is and other platforms, but if we look at how we, like you talked about Isoko, how do we typically engage in trade and business amongst ourselves? And as we sort of explore and build some of these platforms for a Pan-African context, are we taking into consideration how Africans engage, and more importantly, even the way that we use things that weren't meant to be used? So one of the things we see in Kenya is that a lot of trade happens on WhatsApp, which is strange. And then the young kids who use Instagram to showcase their products, they communicate with you on WhatsApp, and then they do a transaction using M-Pesa. And it falls out of the marketplace model completely. It completely breaks the notion that you have to be in a centralized setup. A little bit like what you were saying earlier, that maybe you have a decentralized marketplace. But we've got to sort of look at those nuances and figure out, okay, so how do we do it? What is our formula? What is our nuance? And then we apply it into our platforms. But where regulation was good for, I think, Kenya, where M-Pesa is concerned, is that there was a light touch. It went with the market, but at the same time, it was allowed to flourish around how people behaved around it. And that's what I think we need to see on a Pan-African basis across digital trade.
Yeah, and I will just draw in Patrick, because I know TCA is looking at behavior approach, and I know they'll talk about it, as opposed to really just going with the trends. If you're looking at what banks do when they're putting out loans, no one will ever get a loan. But if you try to look at new ways of doing it. So maybe Patrick, very briefly, as the panel winds up.
Thank you very much. Patrick Obath is my name. I'm a mechanical engineer, but I want to ask a question about these guys. Everybody's talking policy leading innovation. And I get concerned when everybody's talking about policy. In this digital age, when you're talking about innovation, the minute you put a box around it, you can't innovate. So are we trying to legislate something that we don't know and then killing the opportunity? And this goes back to M-Pesa. M-Pesa, they tried to actually regulate it before they knew what they're trying to regulate. And even today, M-Pesa is not regulated because they don't know how they can regulate M-Pesa. It's a platform at the end of the day. So are we going through all this discussion around creating a continent-wide platform opportunities when we really need to remove policies completely and make it work and then regulate it?
I mean, spot on, Patrick. That's what I'd written here, disruptors. When he started speaking, immediately I'm like, we have to disrupt. People, we can't grow as we are growing. We must disrupt. And Patrick is spot on. What is it going to take to disrupt? And I know the government is not the best to ask about disruption. But what is that sweet spot you're going to give to let leeway for? And I know Rwanda really is like a role model in terms of innovation. Your young people out there, they are building. I think for me, the issue I see with Rwanda is how you can scale, how you can connect the dots with the rest of the continent. But over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I'll speak a bit also to the question from Patrick. Definitely, as policymakers and regulators, we need to face the truth. Technology always moves faster than regulation. And we've learned about it some time back, and we started putting in place sandbox environment. I'll give an example. We wouldn't have had blood delivered by drone if we had to sit down and write a policy. So we did it into sandboxing. And recently, last week, we passed our fintech strategy. Financial sector is one of the most regulated. You can't get totally rid of all the regulation because you're dealing with money of the people. So what they did, they have put a sandbox regulatory environment, and since then, almost 50 companies were able to go and graduate, and they're going to get a PSP, Payment Service Provider license. So it's to see how we have agile regulation rather than getting rid totally of those regulations, but the courage of policymakers and regulators to put, an environment that will let new ideas flourish and actually be an enabler rather than being, someone who is blocking those innovative ideas.
I love it. I'm such a disruptor that when I find other disruptors, I love that. We have to disrupt the status quo. We can't let things move as they are. And I get quite frustrated at times. And I keep saying, where am I going to get those allies who can, and I've had this sandbox thing so much, so I'll come back to you to learn more about how we can create more sandboxes for that free thinking and that, opening up spaces. And Gabriel, over to you as we close.
No, I think mine is just to acknowledge, but with caution. Yes, there is a lot of opportunities out there, and it's you can almost taste it because it's there, but between here and there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed, particularly on the side of government. I think this morning we talked about taxes. How do you regulate and tax this? Given that VAT, the primary source of revenue for government, and VAT is paid at the point of sale, and now there's no point of sale. That has been removed. Because you've ordered your product online and you received it online. So government hasn't had a chance to digest this and come up with this. Hence, the default is to oppose it. And there is a need for advocacy constituency. I think you mentioned advocacy earlier, to make sure that government understands what it understands and understands what it doesn't understand, and help them think this through so that they don't become a stumbling block but become an enabler.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Thank you so much to the panel. I think you've heard it. We must, we must advocate. We must create sandboxes. We must, what did you say? Acknowledge with caution, move with caution. But we also must be, I like the one called the old school entrepreneur, but we need to go out there and do it and take action. For us at TradeMark, there's quite a lot of exciting stuff we are doing across the continent. In Djibouti and Ethiopia, we're trying to connect the corridor through a regional electronic cargo tracking and more visibility for the corridor. We've done the iSoko for women traders and youth traders to access a market, an e-market where they can sell their goods. We are still struggling with the last mile delivery and payments. In East Africa, we have really done a lot of automation and digitization. And then the future for us is the blockchain technology and AI, how we can get more predictive with our analysis, how we can get more trust into the system. We see a lot of opportunities, but we need those advocates and allies to really drive the change, both within government, but also within the private sector. And as you do it, don't forget to take a cup of coffee. Thank you so much, and please take my panelists.
And that was Black Coffee, No Sugar, No Cream.